We're told today that the Pharisees came forward and were arguing with Jesus and asked for a sign, which kind of makes you wonder because this is chapter 8 in Mark's Gospel, and he's performed many miracles up to this point. He's cleansed a man with an unclean spirit in Capernaum. He's healed Peter's mother-in-law, he's cleansed lepers, healed a paralytic, raised the daughter of Jairus, healed the woman with the flow of blood, feed the 5,000, he feed the 4,000, fed the 4,000, walked on water, and cured a deaf man. I mean, that's a lot of works, a lot of action, right? And they still demanding a sign and arguing with Jesus and resisting him. If we look in John's Gospel, he describes all the miracles of Jesus as signs, pointing to his divinity. And in Mark's Gospel, he demonstrates his power with many miracles and lots of action, right? It's believed the audience was ancient Rome, and they very much were people of action. And Mark describes Jesus as powerful, right? And his whole Gospel is pointing to him as the Son of God. But they are still invitations to faith, to believe who he says he is. They invite belief. They propose to the people that he is the Messiah, the Son of God. And they invite us to a faith that trusts in Jesus, that clings to him, that clings to his person. He doesn't, God does not force us to believe in him. I remember in seminary, I went to seminary with Father Dyro, and I remember always asking one of the professors, why doesn't God, come and do some great display of power, just to convince the world? And the professor, in many different ways, would tell me the same answer, is that he doesn't overwhelm us. He's not going to force us. He protects our freedom, right? He wants faith and trust. Like if you think of a human friendship or relationship, freedom is at the core of it, right? You don't force somebody to be your friend. You can't force somebody to love you. So God respects our dignity and our freedom, doesn't overwhelm us with a dazzling display of power, but invites us to believe and trust in him. And he will not be controlled by us, right? He's God. He made us, holds us in existence. And many religious leaders of the day, of Jesus' day, rejected him because he didn't come under their authority, right? He wasn't part of their plan. Some were looking for a political Messiah, which we see in Mark's Gospel. Jesus is so careful not to be misinterpreted that way. He always, when reveals himself as the Messiah, it's always in the context of the cross, right? It's not some triumphant political figure. Or maybe some of the religious leaders of the day, some of the Pharisees, just wanted to foster their own power, right? And wanted Jesus to get on board with their plans. Today, I think, as many writers have said, a modern temptation for us is to place ourselves above God. We test them like an experiment in a laboratory, right? If we're trying to verify some phenomenon, whatever, we come up with criteria and we perform the scientific test to see if it meets these standards that we set. And we're very good at that as a culture in the world today, right? Our technology is abounding and growing in so many ways, and we tend to treat God as some kind of experiment. Pope Benedict points this out in his book of Jesus of Nazareth on the temptations of Jesus in the desert, this modern view that we determine the criteria in which God must prove himself to us. And ultimately, this is saying how God should be God, right? It's ridiculous to say, to tell the eternal, infinite, all-powerful being how and which way, what conditions he must meet in order to be God, placing ourselves above him. It makes man the starting point and measure of reality. And modernity likes, I think, to keep God in that controlled way, right? He doesn't like him all that close to us, that presence in our life. Certainly not one who acts in history, right? Our modern mind kind of likes to, try to debunk the miracles and the power of Christ and the fact that God has truly acted in history. So we like to push him aside and keep him from making any demands on our life so as not to interfere with our own plans and designs. St. James in the first reading today warns us that this world is passing like a flower that wilts under the sun, right? And the standards and our ways of thinking are passing. Our self-centered pursuits, our goals and values are passing with this world, which does indeed pass away. Yet Jesus comes to us, inviting us to believe in him, to dialogue with him, to follow him, to spend time with him. And what humility, right? What humility. Father Leo Masberg, I think he's from Austria. He did a series on the network about Mother Teresa. He spent a number of years working with her. And he tells a story of he was in the Czech Republic with Mother Teresa, and they were on a helicopter flying to some place. And he relates how they saw the countryside was just beautiful, as the European countryside can be, with all the fields and the lush green colors. And he said, in this particular day, it was spectacular. And he said, Mother Teresa was looking out the window, and she said, Father, it's easy for us to understand, to believe in the power of God or his majesty, but it's hard for us to get the humility of God, right? To understand or to believe in his humility. But God's humility touches us. It moves us. I think of two times in my life in particular, in the Holy Land, when I was at Nazareth and seeing the tour guide described this village at Jesus' time. It was like 50 families. He would travel to 8 or 10 miles, he and Joseph, to some Roman building project to work every day and did hard labor. He wasn't like a finishing carpenter designing flowers and stuff on a desk or something, but he worked with hard materials. That's what the term carpenter means. I remember being in Ephesus, seeing where John took Our Lady. She lived outside of town. Ephesus was this big, thriving capital city. She lived in the mountains in this beautiful, peaceful spot. There was no structures remaining from her time, but you could sense her presence and just the humility of the Mother of God living in this very out-of-the-way place, not at the center of civilization, so to speak, but humbly in a life of prayer and service. The holiness of Mary, or we think the greatness of the Son of God, in these very humble circumstances, right? And that's an invitation to us. That moves our hearts to see that kind of humility. Doesn't threaten us, doesn't scare us, doesn't frighten us, but he does challenge us, our sinfulness, our self-centeredness, and he wants to break into our world and invite us to be part of his kingdom. And that is a change, that is a challenge, but it's not a threat, right? We recently had a guest on Life on the Rock, Brandon Vogt, and I love this quote. He had a conversion to Catholicism, and he writes, this happened in college. He said, "For most of my life, I never met a rigorous God who made any sort of demand on my life. And I never encountered an intimate God who ravished me with deep love, or an epic God who warred against evil for my sake. The church I grew up in cared for me deeply. It encouraged kindness and presented the basic biblical stories to me, but I never really experienced anything transcendent. The God I grew up with was a tame lion, more cat than beast, more comfortable than dangerous." So when I say that, Jesus invites us, he invites us to faith and to cling to him, but he doesn't leave us in that place, right? He wants to raise us up to be part of his kingdom, to be part of his plan, to seek his will, and that takes faith, and we cling to him with everything we have. And sometimes that is scary for us, but through prayer, through a sacramental life, we grow close to him. We grow in our trust for him.